Okay, so I'll do a little bit of editing before we jump into the next paragraph. So here, I'm just going to go right at him. It's a blank poet, you know. Alexander Pope declares not only that true genius among writers is indeed, I guess we could use it. It's in the intro, but let's see if we can trim this. Here, blank poet Alexander Pope declares not only that true genius among writers is difficult to find anywhere, but also that it is equally difficult to find a literary critic who has good taste in literature. Pope is the progenitor, sort of alliteration. Pope is the progenitor of dozens of witticisms and one-liners. His quips have to do with art and creativity, yet more specifically, they oftentimes have to do with in this piece. So we want to introduce an essay on criticism. You don't want to go too overboard on like raving about how great something is, unless it's connecting to sort of your argument. See, you could say something like here in his eminently quotable poem. Blank poet Alexander Pope. And you notice that I do this a lot in his. It's sort of a presentational thing, or like hold that information back until the later in the sentence. I don't know if it's strategy or whatever, but it's you could put it right up front, but sometimes I like to hold the information back a little bit. So there's like a reveal. So you could say in this text, right? So we don't want to say the same thing over and over and over. In this essay, and then we could put essay with a quote, but then it's going to have a comma in there. So, in this essay, no, because it could be this essay, this text. In This is why it's so tricky to put a quote in the first paragraph. Super tricky. Especially putting it especially one that's from the author in the same poem. But we're gonna do it. You always take a risk. You're always taking risks. You're always making decisions. And so, you've got to make a choice. So it's like, all right, we're gonna make this choice. We're gonna push. And this is what makes writing so interesting and so nerve-wracking at the same time, as opposed to some other subjects where it's more about right answer, wrong answer. I like it though. I think it's a risk because we're also going to put another one of his quotes in the conclusion, which also reminds. It's also hinting to the reader and the grader that it is quotable. We can't even resist putting the quotes in the intro and the conclusion, even if we never put quotes in the intro or conclusion for any of our other essays in that class. It's like, this thing is so quotable. We've got, quotes. We weaved them in everywhere. So that's sort of what we're saying as well. So it's kind of a dialogue, sort of a subtext there. In this text, in an essay, let's just call it an essay. In an essay, I just don't want to say, we could repeat it in an essay in criticism, or we could delete it here. Yeah, we don't have to say this actually. In his eminent, let's just move this phrase to here. So here, how did I forget this? Here, blank poet, Alexander Pope. In his eminently quotable poem, An Essay in Criticism. Yeah, just the comma and quotation. It's not my favorite, but I still think it works. I don't like putting a comma and having all that punctuation. So for programming, it's going to be outside, which I know a little bit about, but as a contrast. But for writing, I'm pretty sure it should be inside. Usually, I have mine inside. I've never been corrected whenever I put it inside. So, in his eminently quotable poem, An Essay in Criticism, many of these quips. So let's say if we changed it in an essay, in Pope's An Essay on Criticism. Yeah, let's. We just said. You know what? Let's undo that. Because even if we deleted that, it's still going to be a comma. And it's eminently quotable poem and essay and criticism. Many of these quips, yeah, it's fine. Many of these quips have to do with art and creativity, and more specifically, they oftentimes have to do with Pope's draws and these two aforementioned occupations. The writer and the literary critic. Yeah, so sometimes I get so stuck on something. You're just so in the weeds that you think something's a huge deal, and then if you just let it go a little bit, as long as it's grammatically correct, then you can let go of it and move on. But I think that the reason why I want to go over this stuff so thoroughly is that everything is gonna be is that you want to be thoughtful about all of your choices. I think that's what good writing is you're very thoughtful. And you're thinking about this stuff, and you're having a dialogue in your head about all these decisions. But yeah, I mean, ideally, I would rather not have that comma there, but it's there, and it still works, and it's still grammatically correct. So, and it still flows. And as Emily quoted, criticism, many of these scripts have to do with art and creativity, and more specifically, often have to do with Pope's draws down these two aforementioned occupations: the writer and the literary critic. Leaves for specific guidelines. And here's our thesis. Right from the poem's opening, line 6, he writes, answers are wrong. So this is extra. I'm sure I'd have a teacher that would just draw a line through it and say that's extra. What is intriguing, what is interesting, what is noteworthy. You could still pull it off. I don't think you're gonna lose points, but if you constantly do it, it just weakens your essay. You just want to make direct statements. Generally want to make direct. So this language at least two in at least potentially read in at least two ways. So I like interpreted because we're giving the clearest word choice and definition. It's the clearest up front. So we're trying to keep the reader intrigued, trying to keep the reader hooked. And then later we can say read because we already articulated it super clearly. So you could say potentially be read in at least two different distinct ways, which is somewhat vague. It's like 80, I don't know, 89% clear. But I want it to be 100% clear, so as much as I can. So this line can potentially be interpreted in at least two distinct ways. And we could delete this. It sort of weakens it, but then we're not arguing the world. We're saying potentially, it can potentially be interpreted in at least two distinct ways. With both ways, minimizing the possibility of aspects, even more so than the poet. Do both ways minimize or they illustrate? With both ways illustrating illustrating that Pope minimizes. Yeah, so we're talking about Pope, not the 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 reading of the line. So this line could, because that's our thesis, right? Our thesis is that Pope deploys rhyme and word choice in order to malign bad critics more harshly than good critics. Both ways. So this defends our thesis, right? With both ways illustrating that Pope minimize the positive aspects of the critic even more so than the poet. One way to read this line is that Pope might be saying, again, we changed interpret to read. The very is written by critic. There is a mere one bad book or poem written by an author for one who writes amiss. Sure, interprets in the line, and we alternate, right? Went from read to interpret. We can pick another word that might be a third synonym, but this is fine. So there's only one bad writer or poet. I guess we could say explicate, right? The potential way to explicate this line. So you're explicating it means you're picking it apart. But if you're explicating it, you're a way to explicate this line. I don't know if it quite fits. I think that word just, for some reason, doesn't quite fit. Because if you're explicating a poem, it just means you're picking it apart in general, and you're trying to write what it means, and this and that. You're explicating a poem. You're picking it apart. But if you're interpreting a poem, you're finding the meaning. It's a little bit more direct, saying that you're interpreting, going from what you're reading to in your own words. Another potential way to interpret this line is that perhaps Pope might be saying that for every 10 bad literary critics out there, I don't like saying there and there again. So you could say for every 10 bad. Yeah, let's just we'll cut that, and I think it's cleaner. For every 10 bad literary critics, there's only one bad writer or poet. Yeah, we could say out there when it's working, but I think for this and this phrase, you want to keep it super clean. Another potential way to interpret this line is that perhaps Pope might be saying that for every bad literary critics, every 10 bad literary critics, there's only one bad writer or poet. Yet with either reading, or even both readings, Alexander Pope seems to be using a ratio of 10 to 1, meaning that there are either 10 bad reviews for every one bad book written, or that there were 10 bad working critics for every bad working author. Yeah, so here we mentioned working and working. In essence, this one line in the first stanza of an essay on criticism. So we've been saying one, first, so I think that opening kind of is a better choice. In essence, this line in the opening stanza, you could say this opening stanza line, but it's a little bit vague. In essence, this line in the opening stanza of an essay on criticism clearly seems to evidence Pope's more aggressive assailing of the critic as compared with the author. Yeah. Since, and then here we want to use different, is such a dramatic contrast. And conveys, portrays, conveys his deference more towards content creators as compared to content critics. So here we're changing the wording a little bit, but I think we're keeping it interesting here. In essence, this line in the opening sense of an essay on criticism clearly seems to evidence Pope more aggressive assailing of the critic. So aggressive assailing, and then we're talking about deference, so that doesn't quite fit. Because this is negative and deference is positive. We can use deference another time if it fits, but I think here, since he's talking smack, it's like 10 to 1 negative. We have to use negative language. So since a 10 to 1 ratio is such a dramatic, I like this because it's it's a different sort of punctuation, but it works. It's 10 ratio is such a dramatic contest, and conveys, and it's tricky because when you say the author, sometimes he's talking, since he's talking about authors, it really becomes tricky. This is probably one of the hardest essays to write just when it comes to that specifically. So you got to be real careful. I mean, this might be a situation where we just keep saying Pope the whole time, because you want to be safe. You don't want to be confusing. You just, number one is do not confuse. That's so crucial. So it's clarity, so since the 10 to 1 ratio is such a dramatic contrast and conveys less acrimony. I guess acrimony. Yeah. What's acrimony from Pope towards bad content creators as compared to compare this with that, compare this to that. I compared this to that. I compared this with that. As compared to bad content critics. I think either one works. conveys less acrimony from Pope towards bad content creators. You could say judgment. Yeah, acrimony is kind of condemnation, condemnation, judgment, acrimony. Let's look at the quote. Tangential wrong for one who writes amiss. Yeah, let's call it judgment. Yeah, let's judge because you already mentioned aggressive assailing, so it's negative, and then the word judgment means he's judging him. And then here's the transition sentence. Book not only uses a 10-to-1 ratio early in the poem, shows greater disregard. And then early in the poem is what we mentioned, opening stanza. Right? So early in the poem shows greater disregard for unworthy critics than unworthy poets. But later he also speaks ill of most critics in general. Sitting in lines 19 and 20. And instead of bad, we said unworthy. So that's good. We're mixing it up. Judgment in their mind. So since we just had him talk about judgment, we can't use judgment here. So I would just say, and I don't want to say condemnation because that's a little heavy and we're early in the essay. So I guess we're going to go to, I guess acrimony. We can pick a different word though. I think it works. Because I don't want to keep saying judgment. We talked about judgment with Pope, and then we talked about judgment. Then the next quote, he's saying the word judgment. So let's start on first post opinion. The large swath of the critical population is already judgmental by nature. Just regards bad critics, more measured reproach of bad authors. Okay. All right. Until the next video.